Hello, how's it going? In today's video, we're continuing the story of Arthas and looking at the Cursed Blade and the Champion of the Damned from Chronicle Volume 3. So let's go! After Stratholme, Arthas' heart had darkened and he was starting to ever so slightly lose his marbles. The Lich King's plan was working. The next step was for Arthas to find Frostmourne, but it wouldn't be as simple as using the Scourge to lead him to it. That would make the prince too suspicious. So, the Lich King turned his attention to some dwarf explorers currently hanging about in Northrend. They were led by Muradin Bronzebeard and had come from Ironforge in search of some artifacts. Muradin had served as an ambassador in Lordaeron when Arthas was a wee little munchkin and had trained him in martial combat. He'd be perfect as a messenger to inform Arthas of Frostmourne. So Mal'Ganis and the other Dreadlords did a little bit of espionage and planted maps and ancient histories that spoke of this legendary runeblade in the dwarves' camp. When they discovered this information, none of them had a bloody clue where it had come from, but they thought, probably nothing to worry about. Muradin was very intrigued by Frostmourne, so the dwarves set out to find it. Meanwhile, Arthas and his men made landfall in a region of Northrend called the Howling Fjord. It was extremely cold, and the Scourge was surprisingly evasive. The Lich King used the Scourge to attack and herd Muradin and his followers towards Arthas. When they finally crossed paths, they all assumed it was just a chance meeting, and that they'd been lucky. Muradin informed Arthas of his purpose in Northrend, as well as his more recent mission to locate Frostmourne, and Arthas decided this sword might come in handy. But just as Arthas started to feel good, and a little bit excited, royal emissaries arrived. They'd tracked down the prince to deliver orders from King Terenas. These orders were pretty straightforward, basically just, "Oi, stop what you're doing and get home. You're grounded." As much as his men wished to stay by the prince's side, disobeying the king would be treason, and that's terrible. So Arthas' followers abandoned their posts and made their way back towards the ships. Chronicle doesn't actually go into detail about this part, not sure if they've retconned it or just forgot. But Arthas didn't want to go home. He'd come too far to give up now, and believed that this was his only chance to stop Mal'Ganis. So he struck a deal with some local mercenaries, and managed to reach and burn the ships before his men arrived. When they did arrive and see the burning ships, Arthas was like, "Who did this? What's going on here?" And then proceeded to convince everyone it must have been the mercenaries. Muradin knew exactly what had happened, so when the mercenaries were promptly executed, he was a little bit disgusted. Arthas informed his men that they now had no choice but to press forward, as they had no means of going home. However, now that the prince and his forces were trapped, Mal'Ganis and the Scourge attacked. There were more undead than you could shake a stick at. Arthas decided he needed to find Frostmourne pretty quick. The prince's forces held the Scourge at bay whilst Arthas and Muradin tracked the runeblade to a small cavern, and there it was, in a block of ice, radiating not only power, but also something slightly ominous. Muradin took one look at it and said, "Nah, sod that." But Arthas wasn't going to leave it now. Suddenly, energy burst out of the sword and caused an explosion. The block of ice shattered, sending shards across the cavern, one of which impaled Muradin. Arthas rushed to heal his friend with the holy light, but then stopped. His thoughts turned to Frostmourne and its power. That was real power, unlike this light nonsense. What's the light ever done for me? It hadn't stopped the undead. It hadn't saved all those innocent victims of the plague. It's bloody useless. In that moment, Arthas turned his back on the light and took hold of the runeblade. Its power surged through him, chilling his veins and devouring his soul. Through the sword, the Lich King could now speak in Arthas' mind and guide his actions. However, for the time being, he'd allow Arthas to believe he was in control of his own fate. There was one more thing Arthas needed to do. Arthas buggered off, but it's worth mentioning that Muradin didn't die. The ice shard had only knocked him unconscious. When he did wake up, he was in pretty bad shape and had no idea who he was. Anyway, Arthas returned to his base camp. The Lich King whispered through Frostmourne, urging Arthas to feed the blade, and he bloody did. He carved through the undead like a hot knife through butter or something. The humans rejoiced, but Arthas didn't give them much time to rest. The Lich King had informed him that Mal'Ganis was somewhere among the undead, so they launched a counterattack. Humans were dying left, right and centre, but Arthas wasn't that bothered. He just continued marching forward until he discovered Mal'Ganis. The Lich King was pleased. This was his first step towards freedom. Instead of commanding Arthas to stand down, he issued a single order through Frostmourne. Arthas plunged the runeblade into the Dreadlord and boom, one of the Lich King's most powerful legion handlers had now been taken out. The other Dreadlords weren't all that pleased about Mal'Ganis' death, but the Lich King convinced them that it was an unfortunate accident. Arthas wasn't under his full control yet, but he soon would be, and then everything will be dandy. However, the Lich King didn't know that the Dreadlords were actually shielded from Frostmourne's soul-devouring nuth, so Mal'Ganis wasn't truly dead, just back in the twisting nether. Sooner or later, he'd be reborn. The remaining Scourge scattered and the surviving humans celebrated, but Arthas didn't. He buggered off again. Wandering alone, the Lich King flooded his mind with dark knowledge. Not only did this strip away the last shreds of his humanity, but also taught him how to wield necromantic powers. When Arthas finally returned to camp, his skin had turned pale and his hair was white. Gone was the Prince of Lordaeron. He was now a Death Knight. He slaughtered his followers and Frostmourne feasted on their souls. Some arose as simple Scourge minions, others were transformed into Death Knights themselves. He rallied the Scourge to his side and prepared to leave Northrend. It was time to go home. And we're leaving it there! I'm loving this. In the next Volume 3 video, we'll be joining the Horde on their journey to Kalimdor, doing a bit of globe trotting. If you enjoyed this video, press the like button. Also, you could totally subscribe if you want. But all that's left to say is, thanks very much for watching, and see ya!